This is coffee number 5. I'm your host, Lara Schmoisman. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to coffee number 5. My coffee's ready and it's warm, and I have the best guest for you today. We always talk about this, that there is not, if there is a will, there is a way. And if sometimes you need to be open and to see what's out there for you. I don't think that Dr. Jen, who's here today with us, ever expected to be an NFL coach. This is something that you dreamt of. Welcome, Dr. Jen.
Oh, welcome. No, I never dreamt of coaching football because that was something that girls didn't do, right?
Yes.
I wasn't even able to play football until I was 22 years old. And so, there was no place that I could look on the sidelines and say, I want to be her. So I think it's a really cool place to be in the world when we look at it not as it is, but how it can be. And I think that's how we open our minds.
I know, but okay, let's go a little backwards because I started like at the end. Tell us a little bit, how did you get here? I mean, it's incredible, your journey, that you were the first female coach in the NFL. This is huge. You broke all the rules.
I think so. And, it's interesting in football, we always say move the chains, right? Like if you think about the American football field, you see the big orange chains on the sidelines and they move them. That's how we measure progress, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to get 10 yards at a time. It's this big visual thing. I've had so many people ask me about goal setting and this, that, and the other. And one day it struck me. I don't want to just move the chains. I want to break them. Because if we're only looking at progress as being measured in 10-yard increments, how are we as women playing a game that was not designed for us going to ever get ahead? Because we're playing rules that we weren't included in. And once you get to that mindset, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not limited by what's there. I'm actually excited about the fact that in a game that has had the least progress for women, we have the most potential for growth.
Amazing. But how did you get from, tell us where you come from and how did you get from there to the NFL? And we'll talk about what you're doing today too. But this is your journey. I had the pleasure of seeing you at the conference talking and telling about, it was so motivational. And that's why I wanted to have you in the podcast. And you were wearing these amazing high heels and talking about football, which was such a conundrum to me. But tell us a little more. What you started your career?
So I grew up in Vero Beach, Florida, where football is a way of life, right? It is like a religion there. The whole town shuts down. Everybody goes. And just like so many kids sitting in the stands, I looked at the field and I thought, they look like real life superheroes. And I want to be a superhero too. And it was the first place in the world that somebody told me what girls can do and what boys can do is different. Thankfully for me, football wasn't the only sport for me. So I played a lot of sports, but though the things I might have done in the world seem big, I am actually only 5'2". So I am 5'2", about 130 pounds. And so I was told in a lot of spaces in the world that I was just not big enough or I'd never be strong enough because of my size. And so tennis was my first sport. They told me because of my size and build, I'd never be strong enough to play pro tennis. Then I found my place in team sports. I think the beauty of team sports to me was that I didn't have to be everything on my own. I could be a great part of something bigger. And that's what I found in team sports. And thankfully played soccer. I was a 2-year captain. This is my dog, Boss. She loves to crash Zoom interviews.
Hi.
I was a 2-year captain in soccer in high school, then decided to go to Boston for business school. And once I got to Boston, I found rugby. I had never seen rugby before growing up. And I was like, what is this crazy, wild, amazing sport that like it's kind of soccer meets football and they tackle, and I love it. And so I was all in. I ended up playing all 4 years of college rugby for Boston College.
And I don't want to think what your mother thought about that, because I think rugby is the one sport that is so scary.
You know, I don't think my mom really had watched rugby. But when she saw it, she was like, this really makes sense. And then, you know, I got recruited for the under 23 national team in rugby, although I didn't make it. So for anybody who has gotten to the point where you thought you had this dream and you thought it was a pathway and you didn't get it and you didn't make it and it was hard to get back up, that was my story, right? I literally thought I was finally there and had found my destiny, and then I just didn't make it. And I was devastated. And I started playing flag football on weekends. And the general manager of a team up there called the Mass Mutiny, called the league and said, do you think any of your girls playing flag could play tackle? Having come from rugby, I never stopped tackling. So they were probably really happy to get rid of me. They were probably like, take her, get her out of here. She breaks all the rules anyway. Like, take her, take her, take her. And I ended up going to an open tryout and making my first football team there, which led to about a 14, 15-year women's tackle football career. Won 4 Super Bowls, had the honor of playing for the first and second women's team, you know, national team, and winning 2 gold medals.
That's how, because that was so early on in the women's football championship. How many teams were out there?
There were six countries represented in the first one. Yep, first and second actually. Yeah, which was so amazing, because when we went to go play for the first time, we didn't even have tape on anybody. So, you know, you think about like this global sport that you see, but like these women's teams, we had no idea what to expect. So we had to prepare for anything and everything, and, you know, go to, gosh, the first championship was in Stockholm, Sweden, and go to Stockholm, Sweden, and just literally take on the world, which was probably one of the coolest experiences of my life.
I can imagine that. And are you still in touch with your teammates from then?
Oh, absolutely. You know, those are some of the very best women in the world, and I think it's one of those things. Though it was, you know, the first women's U.S. national team was in 2010, right? So 14 years ago. I don't think it matters if I see somebody every other day or every 10 years. That is a bond that will never be broken.
Yeah, those relationships are so meaningful, and you have so much in common, and at the same time they're so unique because there's so few people in the world who get to experience that.
Yes.
So from there on, how did you evolve? So you played for 15 years, you said? And
yes, about 15 years. And then I got recruited to a team called the Texas Revolution, which was an indoor football league team. Okay. And they actually wanted me to play against the guys. And so I became the first woman to play running back in men's pro football. I played a year against the men, which was more than anybody thought was possible. And after surviving that season, which is what I tell everybody.
But I question, because you said that you're so petite, and then you weren't even able to play some sports for women, and now here you're recruited a few years back after to run against men, which in football they're pretty big.
They are really big, and I'm still 5'2". But, you know, I think one of the things in being undersized for me is that I never got to take a shortcut on anything. So if I was going to play, I had to be, you know, really fast and really strong and really well trained and really resilient, because it meant you were going to take some big hits and get back up and do it again. And I think just the passion and drive for the game drove me to not only, you know, just be willing to give everything I had. And I was actually very outspoken my whole career about how I would never play against men. And it was knowing how much all the other women, like my sisters, that we had all sacrificed for the game of football that made me willing to do it, because I knew the stakes were high. I knew there was a chance that I'd never get back up. And yet I also didn't know how to do it any other way. And so to me, that was, kind of a priceless opportunity. And it was a risk I was willing to take to move the game forward.
But what do you think that changed that someone recruited you, a woman, to run with men? What
I
changed in the
think
world? What changed in the space?
I don't know that it was necessarily that. I think they thought it would be a big story, and I think they thought I would wash out after a few days. And the fact that I didn't was the part that's so special, right?
Yeah.
Like there was no delusion that I was going to run over these guys or pass them, but I became a great teammate, and we did something that no one imagined was possible, and that's the power of it. And we formed great relationships despite what the world thought was possible. And it was because of that that I then got asked to coach the same team the following season.
How, so now I have two questions. The first one is, how was your relationship as a teammate with the opposite sex when you started?
Amazing. Amazing. Like, those guys taught me a lot. And what we realized is it couldn't be me versus them. It had to be us against the world. And they really took me in, and it was a point of pride for those guys that, they were doing something that had never been done in the world of football. And, I think it made all of us not only better players, but really better people. And I still am super tight with those guys to this day. Like we look at that and we laugh, or they'll call me and they'll be like, did you see this? Or, and just it taught me to be a way better teammate, because in the women's game, I and another girl, we had the same stats across the board. And we led the US national team in tackles. So I won a gold medal and led the team in tackles with somebody else. So the two of us led the team. We had literally tied. So one of the best in the world, knew I could tackle anybody. That's without question. In the men's game, that wasn't the case, right? So I could be like the enforcer. I knew there was nothing I couldn't do on a football field as a woman. And then in the men's game, this was not the case. I needed, and you always do, but like those guys really looked out for me, and I learned to add value in other ways than, being the one who could literally tackle anybody, right? Like it was a completely different role.
This is so great. I mean, you had the experience from very few people having the world to be a player in a women's team and in a men's team. What's the difference? Are the women's really more bitchy and the men more laid back and just let's just fight it off and that's it? Or what's the difference?
Well, one thing that I will say, like for the women want to know the why, right? They don't want to just say go here. They want to know, how does going here fit into the bigger strategy? Like I want to know the parts around me. Whereas a lot of the times the guys are just like, okay, go. Right. That is one of the things that's different. And then number two, I think guys take things less personally. Like I've literally watched guys get into a fist fight, and then, you'll be icing your face and they'll be like, man, you really got me with that hook. Can you show me how you did that? Oh yeah, let me show you why. You moved your hand and then boom. And they'll, they don't take that personally. It's not like it's against them. And sometimes I think we as women do ourselves a disservice because we take things more personally and hold on to them longer. I know I'm guilty of it, and I know some of my friends are. It's like,
Oh, I'm
if we could
super
just,
guilty of it. I
right,
try
if we
not
could
to
just
be.
dust it off, right?
Yeah, I try not to be, but it gets into us.
It does.
It
And
does.
we assume then that I think in our relationships with guys too, we sometimes assume that they're taking it as personally as we are, and they're not. Like,
Well,
literally, if
I
you ask
think
them about something, they'd be like,
also for women, I think many time is like we are when you discussing something, sometimes we're discussing a problem. It's not about the relationship. And I notice this with my husband too. When I'm fighting about something, I'm about fighting about the coffee. And we're fighting about the coffee. It doesn't have to involve the relationship or how this. That's a different conversation. And I
yep,
think many times women we get a lot more emotional and we put everything together.
yes, we do. We do. And, we might have some lingering stuff that was like 2 weeks ago, and it comes out in a conversation that's not related. And the guys will be like, whoa, where did that come from? Right. Like, and they'll literally be like, don't get it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting because, we look at and interpret the feelings of others through our own personal lens. And so often that's not the case for the other person. And that was one of the biggest things that I noticed that was different with the guys versus the women.
And then you transition to coach the same team. So how was to transition from being a team member to a coach? Because they need to follow your orders.
Yes. And I mean, so first of all, it's not orders, right? It's always in respect,
Yeah.
right? And I earned their respect as a player. They knew I was there for the right reasons, right? Like, some of those guys literally hit me every day and watched me get back up and do it again. Our head coach actually said to me one day, he's like, man, Welter, if I could take the heart in your chest and put it in every one of these guys, we would be undefeated. And so the, you know, coaching is trust, love, respect, right? Like, those things work together. They already knew that I was there for the right reasons. I'd earned their respects taking the hit. And that we loved each other already as a teammate. So sometimes the dynamics have to shift. But I think the way that I earned it that way was really powerful for a lot of the guys, because they were like, no, 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 she's the truth, right? Like, we've seen her take hits that you would not get back up from. Like, she's the real deal. And it was important, I think, in that dynamic that I had been out on the field with them.
Do you think it makes you a better coach being a former player?
It's an interesting dynamic that, people say, well, if you haven't played, you can't coach. Um, I don't think you can't be a great coach without having played. However, in my career, it's an element that I use to understand the game and also understand the players, right? I don't necessarily compete with other coaches and say I'm better because of this. I'm a unique person in the space. I played, I've coached, I've played with men, I've played with women, I've coached men, I've coached women, and I also have a PhD in sports psychology. So I look at the game through a different lens than someone else does. And I think what's most important is that we find ways to reach athletes, because if you can't reach someone, it's impossible to teach them.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm so glad that you brought up about your PhD, because that's what I wanted to go next and talk about, because why you decided that you needed this degree of a PhD in sports psychology?
So when I was playing football, there was no roadmap for a woman in the space. And I knew I was getting valuable practical experience as a player, but how could I create a space to make this sport that I was talented in my life's work? That wasn't an option for women. And what I thought is, if I got my PhD, which I did while playing, then
That's
I would take
intense.
my, so I would take my practical experience as a player and fuse that with my, education as a scholar to be someone who uniquely understood the sport and its players and, the ups, downs, rights, lefts, and could add value to whatever situation I was in. And so that was really the plan, is how could I continue to be unique and special to the sport itself.
You made yourself real special because you were like not only understanding the game, because anyone can understand the game from watching it, but then you know how it feels to play the game. And I mean, what we feel in our body playing it, getting hurt, all those things, you can understand it from experience. And
Yes.
also mentally understanding what you're going through. I mean, it's it's tough, it's heavy, and also the pressure from the fans, from the club. That's something that a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think for me, I absolutely consider myself a player's coach and one who, puts relationships at the core of understanding. And so that's, to me, that's what's special. Right. And that is, again, that's from the combination of having played, having coached, and having a PhD.
Yeah. So how do you, I mean, the career of any athlete, it's short and it's tough. And how you transition from being an athlete and to after the game, after you're done?
Yeah, I mean, so when we look at athlete transition, a lot of how well athletes transition depends on, what that timing was like. Was it expected? Was it their choice versus someone else's? And in how many ways in our life do we identify, right? Like, what is our identity composed of? So the athletes who have the hardest transitions are ones in which, one, they experienced identity foreclosure, which means they're really one thing and one thing only. So if we take away that one thing, who am I? Right? Which is
Yeah.
any of us. And then the second one is, was it unexpected? So an unexpected transition from a sport is harder. They compare the psychological impact on an athlete in experiencing a career-ending or threatening injury as the death of a close family member.
Wow.
That's how hard it hits us psychologically. So thankfully for me, in terms of transition, the transition from player to coach was an opportunity. It wasn't a like, I can't do this anymore. I think sometimes I feel like maybe I retired too early, because I was at the peak of my athletic career when I stopped playing, and went into coaching. A lot of the women who I know and love, they actually joke and they're like, Welter never retired. She got stolen, because I got taken by the men's game. And so, in that part, I mean, I think all of us always feel like we could play anytime I'm out on a camp or like coaching guys. Like, even my guys are like, man, coach, it's like you could still play. And I'm like, oh, don't put that idea back in my head. Please don't do it. But you always, I think, have that love for the game, or at least I did.
Yeah.
Right. I will
Someone
always
once
love that.
told me that once an athlete, always an athlete.
Absolutely. But where do you take it and transition it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I love pickleball. I'm going to, and I can hopefully play that for the rest of my life. So that's beautiful, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's channeling that energy. And I think, instead of saying this part of me is gone, it's saying, how can this part of me go on?
And last week I was in an event that a lot of really high-level C-suite corporate individuals were transitioning into consulting. And they were the fear of having all that pressure and that visibility is they were having the fear of disappearing. Do you think
Right.
that that's something that affects athletes
I
in
think
this?
it affects everybody, right? I think, when you've been very visible, I think, we get a part of who we are by how we're identified, right? Like, if you're used to having your face on a poster and all of a sudden there are no posters anymore, that's hard, right? Do you feel like the game has passed you by, or some of those things? So I think it's important to reimagine certain elements of self, right? We're used to this kind of visibility. Okay, well, if that's important, where can you get that in other areas of your life, right? For me, you know, maybe I'm not on the sidelines of the NFL anymore, right? But I can be there as a mentor for girls in camps. But I had to create those camps in order to do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I knew in showing up for them, I could be the person that they needed, and that part wasn't contingent on anybody else, hiring me or putting me in that position. Those were things that I could do and create and build that nobody else owned. And I think so many times, whether you're an employee or you're a teammate or a player on a team, that that element isn't all up to you, right? Like, it's not up to any of us, right? Father Time is undefeated in some of those ways, but there are also certain things that we can create. And I think life is about recreating, right? Like, it's a constant state of change on who we are and what we're capable of. We just have to figure it out and be willing to.
I always say that I renegotiate with myself and with the world who I am.
Right.
And you have all the tools to renegotiate. And then as you grow and as you mature, you have more tools. So
That's
never
right.
give that for granted. So you have a lot more things that you can offer to the world. You just don't need to, you need to just get up and try it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's next for Dr. Jan?
Um, I am constantly, I like to say I'm, constantly, I like how you said it, renegotiating. Um, I have several programs that I build that are mine. One is Gridiron Girls. I've done 60 girls camps across the country to date. Worked with some of the top girls in the game now. That I started that back in 2017. I have a program called A Day in the Life, where I teach women who are in other fields of play how to come out onto my field and learn the game of football. I think it's very empowering and it's a fun thing, because if you haven't gotten to do it, why wouldn't I teach you? So I literally bring women into my game to step their game up. It's huge confidence builder. That's one of my favorite programs. And then I think, I'm a creative at heart, so I write quite a bit, and I think there's a lot of storytelling there. In terms of coaching, I don't know yet. Last year, I was in the XFL. I was the linebackers coach for the Vegas Vipers. But the XFL and the USFL have merged, and so Vegas wasn't one of those teams. So we'll see in terms of coaching again what's next.
Okay, well, can't wait. I'm sure that we're gonna see you doing amazing things, because your life has been nonstop, and I can't see you not doing something amazing again. I'm breaking
Yeah.
rules.
Well, I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I was really enjoying this podcast and this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me, and for bringing great messages to all of your listeners. It's truly a pleasure to join another kick-ass woman.
And to you guys, I will see you next week with more coffee number 5.
Find everything you need at laraschmoisman.com or in the episode notes right below. Don't forget to subscribe.
It was so good to have you here today. See you next time. Catch you on the flip side. Ciao, ciao.